In the Edwardian era, many working-class families lived on a budget of 20 shillings or less a week and, besides keeping themselves, parents often had between 6 and 8 children to clothe and feed, as well as pay the rent, buy coal and light, and take care of other household sundries before even thinking about drink, smoking and gambling. Today, in an account of life in Edwardian-era South London, written by a gentleman of the time who recorded the stories of people who lived there, you will discover the customs and habits of typical working-class families, how they lived and spent their money. South of the River Thames were to be found wharves, factories and slums along the riverside, interspersed by filthy, rubbish-strewn streets. These were the homes of the working classes, and this scene of the early 1900s would have been little different to the latter days of the Victorian era. In contrast, however, suburban villas far from the river and its acrid vapours were being built and occupied by the aspiring middle class. Find out how Londoners ate cheap food, fish, bread and jam, accompanied by inferior tea. And yet vanity meant they spent money on smart clothes, as it was considered important to make an impression on your neighbours, despite the high cost of continually buying items on the cheap that were wont to fall apart. This is where the bane of the poor and working classes made their money. The pawnbroker was ever present in the lives of many Edwardians. It was here that they sold their best clothes when money was short, if only temporarily, so that the money could feed the family for another week. And if this wasn't enough, moneylenders could easily be found on the streets, ready to trap anyone desperate enough for cash into extortionate repayments at 500%. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us continue bringing the past alive. Food is cheap in price and quality alike. A shilling will buy a Sunday dinner for a family of 5. But the vegetables, though large in size, will not be too fresh, and the meat will be black with the finger marks of those critical ladies who pinch all the joints as they pass along the stalls in the road, and perchance buy one of them. Eggs are bought in some quantities and fried, for they are too old to be boiled or poached. The milkman does a good trade in the better streets, for he sells in pennyworths, but in the poorer homes fresh milk is rarely seen. Tins of condensed milk are cheaper, and by reason of their sweetness save the supply of sugar. Methods of distribution seem seriously at fault when this should be so, for the cows are browsing 10 miles away, while the condensed milk has far to travel and much to suffer before it reaches here. The children, as a consequence, are fed on tea, with a slight colouring of milk. The tea is cheap when bought by the pound, though inclined to be dusty and unproductive. Unhappily, the practice of buying in small quantities has increased of late years, and the science of housekeeping is utterly forgotten. When tea time approaches, one of the elder children, still at school, is dispatched to the little shop round the corner and bidden to buy and bring back a pennyworth of tea, a halfpenny worth of sugar, 2pence halfpenny worth of tinned milk, a pennyworth of jam, and a loaf of bread. Butter, rice, and soap are bought in similar quantities, at what calculation would soon prove to be a ruinous rate. It will be remembered, among many families, that in nursery days the staple dish for tea or breakfast was bread and butter, and that only on special days was bread and jam substituted for the plainer fare. But with South London children, the opposite is the case. Jam is so much cheaper than butter that the child looks ordinarily for bread and strawberry flavour. When given the opportunity, at a party or a picnic, he will devote his attention to the luxury of bread and butter. The jam, 2pence halfpenny a pound, has much sugar in it of the cheaper sort, and much that is warm and greasy to the taste. Meat is reserved, as a rule, for Sunday. But certain kinds of fish are seen daily in nearly every house. Numberless shops abound where skate and cod are fried in oil and served out steaming over the counter on scraps of old newspapers with chip potatoes. A portion of moderate size can be bought for 3 halfpence and constitutes a usual supper for a working boy. The taste will be found even stronger than the smell, but it is the most popular of all dishes, especially before going to bed. In addition to this fried fish, which is usually eaten in the street, kippers, 2 for 3 halfpence, or bloaters, or finnan haddock are bought at the stalls in the street and cooked at home. Bloaters are smoked herrings, smoked without gutting, which gives a gamey flavour. Finnan haddock is also smoked. Cheap fish, jam, and tea are thus the principal foods which make up the marrow and muscle of the riverside population. There are many additional dainties proper to seasons of jollity or unusual prosperity, such as shrimps, winkles, and watercress. These are also the offerings of hospitality on Sunday afternoon. As with food, so with clothes. Their immediate prices are very low, but they are of such a quality, and the manner of their purchase and use is so uneconomical, that if careful accounts were ever kept, the total amount spent on clothes by a family in the course of 2 years would be found to be far out of proportion to their whole income. A number of causes contribute to this. In the beginning, there is much personal vanity, which may be curbed forcibly by low wages and high prices, but never dies. This vanity takes the form of a desire to impress and to surprise, and it issues in a passion for new clothes that are very obviously new, and that are also tight, smart, and uncomfortable, extremely unsuited to either action or repose. Side by side with this common instinct lies the equally common dread of appearing to neglect social obligations. A funeral demands black clothes. Borrowed plumes rarely suffice, though it is sometimes permissible for a woman to hire a heavy velvet cape or a large black hat. The clothes themselves are almost invariably bought, and in the case of a large family the expense is very considerable. On Sundays they are enslaved by a similar tradition. It is a day for better clothes, for starched collars and bright boots, whether they be black or yellow. The mother, with a sense of bitter pride, will not allow her family to stray into the main streets, should a week of depression have ended in the pawning of their Sunday clothes. The father, himself, deprived of his best shirt and collar, omits to shave, and kicks about his room in socks, having lain in bed till past midday, remembering with a sigh of relief that, at any rate, he cannot be expected to go to church. The boy of 16 acquiesces in this subservience to opinion, and remains indoors all day, caged for want of a collar. When sentiments such as these are deeply inbred, it requires but a showy tailor's window, with offers of cheap ready-made suits, to tickle a young man's fancy into wild extravagance. A boy earning 12 or 15 shillings a week is always saving with an eye on a new suit for Sunday. He buys not one, but 2 or more in the course of a year, for their smartness is short-lived. They are too cheap to wear for very long. They are not kept with sufficient care at home. They are worn at the wrong times. Those tight green trousers, the waistcoat with fancy buttons, the coat which fits like a glove, are not to be wasted on only local eyes. They are taken for a day in the country, and return soaked and shapeless, with seams awry, and far more than the fashionable number of creases. They even go to camp, lie scattered in a tent with hay and treacle for companions, and in a week age very quickly. One good suit at nearly double their price, wisely worn and neatly folded, would last a year or more, while for the weekday evening an old coat and grey flannel trousers with a well-tied scarf would serve every purpose. On these points public opinion requires education, but with boys the process is comparatively easy, for they are of a highly imitative disposition. Boys and girls save consciously for their clothes, but the elder folk rely on some windfall or turn of fortune to repair their stock. There is far too little cleaning and mending and patching, far too great an impatience for a new outfit when the old is torn or stained. A further cause of extravagance, and, indeed, of ill health, lies in the strange fact that nearly every child and the majority of elder people wear far too many clothes. In the Kent hop fields, a boy will be found sitting on the edge of his bin, under a hot September sun, picking for 10 hours a day, fortified by an old coat, a thick waistcoat, a knitted jersey, and 2 old shirts. On Blackheath, 2 shirts are considered the right amount for both cricket and football. The tendency is perhaps most marked among small children at elementary schools. In the year 1909, over 14,000 children were examined, and only 21 were found to be insufficiently clothed. It is possible, and indeed justifiable, to guess the converse of these figures. It is almost as easy to find a child with too many clothes as it is rare to chance upon one with too few. The clothes are, indeed, old and dirty and torn, but their primary fault is excess rather than defect. The prevalence of vermin in summer is largely due to the wearing of 2 unwashed shirts and a perpetual jersey underneath other clothes. In this miserable weight, the child runs all day long, grows tired and hot, more than usually susceptible to cold, and a more obvious prey to all the evils of dirt and insanitation. If the couple of cotton shirts could be discouraged, and a simple woolen or flannel one be made at home, the lad would be far happier, and the cost would very possibly be less. In the background of all calculations stands the usurious pawnbroker, the treacherous friend of every poor family. The annual clothing bill would be far less if it were not for the fatal ease with which the blind, harassed mother can obtain his momentary assistance. A suit of clothes may be bought for a sovereign out of hard-earned savings, and worn with pride throughout a Sunday. But on the Monday the rent-collector will call. All that remains of Saturday's wages is barely sufficient for the week's food, and the only realizable asset which can be dispensed with for 6 days is the new Sunday suit. On Monday morning a group of women with bundles tied in old newspapers will be seen outside the pawn shop, waiting for the doors to open at 9 a.m. For this is a common weekly practice, and not the urgent measure of exceptional distress. It is true that on next Saturday night the suit will in all probability be redeemed, but the suit by then will have cost a guinea instead of £1, and every time it is pawned in future will add a shilling to the price. The pawnbroker is a scrupulously honest merchant, a moneylender who is always sure of his security, but his business is a blight upon the life of the district, and his system tempts almost beyond endurance the shiftless and improvident tendencies of his regular customers. The wastage of money may be great in food and clothes, but pleasures are wonderfully cheap. There are so many things that provide pleasure which cost nothing. There is a great genius for watching among all Londoners. They are happy to look on at any scene that accidentally or by design may stimulate emotion. A funeral may be seen any day at no cost, and appeals to all. This and a fire engine, an arrest in the street, the short, quick appearance of friends at the police court, are scenes in melodrama not a bit less moving than the sensations pumped up for 6pence at a theatre. A walk along the crowded street at night is an easy and inexpensive outing of which they never tire. Every cornet player and barrel organ has a small group. The open-air meetings are mildly enjoyable. In the street there is always something to be seen, and something may happen at any moment. These small excitements suffice to make many happy, and yearnings for blue seas and green fields are rare or unknown, for these things in themselves are unsatisfying, and when a visit to the country does occur, a sudden rush will be made for the nearest shop or street, and if there are none, there may be considerable discontent. The pleasures of a holiday consist very largely in the power and opportunity to purchase a number of cheap souvenirs, which give a wonderful degree of pleasure in proportion to their cost. No little lad is ever allowed to set out for a school treat without a penny or two, for without the joy of spending money, there is no holiday. A boy may plead that he has not the money with which to pay for a week's camp. On inquiry, it may be found that he has enough money to pay for his railway ticket and camp fees, but there is not enough pocket money to make a real holiday possible, and without that surplus camp is not worth anything. The pennies spent on picture postcards buy much delight for those who scroll upon them simple pleasantries that have some reference to the comic picture on the back. They are treasured and prized by those who receive them, shown to everyone who desires to see them, and to many who do not. The receipt of a letter is a very lasting pleasure. It is opened with great care after minute inspection, read very slowly, read again many times in the next 6 months, kept very often for an even longer period, and shown to a very wide circle of friends. The pleasure of a mere gossip at the street door or at the corner cannot easily be exaggerated. A group of boys leaning against the wall or over the counter of some ice cream shop will discuss league football or county cricket from 9 o'clock to midnight, while their mothers will find the same time pass very quickly as they rehearse the details of a sudden passing, standing with their babies at the entrance of the court. Many and strange are the relaxations of workers, but the greater number of them cost little or nothing. Others there are, without doubt, as smoking, drinking, gambling, and betting, which make sad inroads into the weekly incomes and small capitals. But, save indeed for the unpardonable luxury of smoking, these are habits indulged in only by the minority, and the larger part of the English people enjoy life itself, demanding wonderfully little more. There are, however, luxurious habits which are growing up, and though involving in themselves only the expenditure of halfpennies, yet in the aggregate they imply a larger income than is usually the case. These habits are for the most part thoughtless concessions to comfort, smoothing the hard road of poverty, but for the poor man there can be few soft places if he is to keep pace with the exigencies of food and rent. It is more and more the custom of the working boy or man to spend a penny on being shaved, to spend a halfpenny on a tram when he has time and energy to walk, another halfpenny on an evening paper, another penny for having his boots blacked. All these little conveniences of civilization are pardonable as occasional extravagances, but as regular expenses they belong to a more prosperous type of life, where the struggle for daily bread is less acute. There still remain the ordinary pleasures of social contact with friends and neighbours. These cannot be so easily assessed. The attitude of the family to other families in the same street, or in the same buildings, is always a little puzzling. The mother is often at pains to assure her visitor that they always keep themselves to themselves, and don't associate, as you might say, with none of them. When reproached in the name of Christian charity, she would explain that she didn't know how it was, but she hadn't been brought up to have anything to do with people of that sort. The language they use is that bad you wouldn't believe. The discrepancy is so great, indeed, that she even finds it necessary to prevent her children from having anything to do with the others in the street. A second visit will find the children playing stump cricket, in such harmony as the uncertain rules of the game will allow, apparently unconscious of the social barriers between them. The mother herself will be found deep in conversation with 3 despised neighbours, all united by expressions of mutual admiration and endearment against some interfering official. Penetration beyond her front door would disclose the presence in her kitchen of sundry articles which she has freely borrowed from some neighbour. Why, then, this professed isolation? It is, perhaps, the only form left to each family of asserting a certain inherent pride, for it is by contrast that men most easily come to respect themselves. By mutual contrast, the families are each led to think themselves a superior unit, set in strangely inferior company. But this is only the theory on which they rely to prove their own importance, and it rarely colours their daily contact or their natural kindness. The boys find their friends wherever they please, and the girls do not regulate their likes or dislikes by the social antipathies of their mothers. The men and women find their own confidants and companions with a similar freedom from snobbery or bias. As a family, they do not make friends with another family, but hold apart. As individuals, they follow the dictates of their own tastes. By this curious distinction, friendship and intimacy is made possible without prejudicing the claim of each family to live on its own tin pedestal. The alleviation of many financial difficulties might be secured if cooperative enterprise was more successful. For individual charity and kindness, there is a spontaneous readiness among poor neighbours that is well known to all the world, but cooperation is not a natural growth. It will need years of careful fostering, much active sympathy, and many gentle leaders living by the side of these families who are so jealous of predominance. When speaking of many thousands, generalizations are a little weak, but it is still possible to point to one or two tendencies that may be traced in every home in the riverside. The first is the blindness to the future. All resources of body and mind and pocket are concentrated on the breasting of today's small waves. The breakers of next week are unheeded. It is on this temporizing habit that the harpies who lend money are able to rely. There is one such in nearly every street, a woman of middle age who starts with a small capital of a few pounds and ends with several hundreds. She lends shillings to wives who are pressed for rent, to girls who want new dresses, to boys who have gambled and lost. Her rate of interest, well known in the street and imposed without protest, is a penny in the shilling per week. It is only people who shut their eyes to the future who could ever borrow money so generally as the poor are in the habit of doing at 500%. It is because of the same concentration on the present that boys are driven to accept work that pays best and offers the least prospect of advancement or even bare continuance. It is for this reason that men and women lightly give up their work on some frivolous pretext. If the faculty of foresight were more commonly in use, the housekeeping of each family would be revolutionized, the daily customs and habits of each person almost entirely different.